Welcome to Why I Left, a podcast that explores the Great Resignation. I'm your host, Brian Akar. Join me as I chronicle real stories from real people about the reasons they decided to leave their jobs during the pandemic and what has happened since. Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Why I Left. In today's episode, I chat with Judy Jackson. Judy retired from the corporate world as the global head of culture and engagement from WPP to help other organizations build inclusive cultures where people can thrive. She's now the president of JLC Ventures, where she develops authentic leaders. Now, I really enjoy my conversation with her. And you know what? She asked me a few questions in this one. So I really enjoyed us having that dialogue. Let's go check out her story. All right, welcome back. So our guest today is Judy Jackson. Judy is the president of JLC Ventures. She's driven by bringing out the best in others while maintaining her authentic self. Now, Judy is a well-respected thought leader in human resource management who, up until recently, was the head of culture and engagement at WPP. She provided the vision and strategy for building a culture where people can bring their whole selves to work and respected for who they are. I'm really excited to have her on the show. And so, Judy, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Brian. I've been looking forward to this. It's been a while.
It's been a while, but you know, good things come to those who wait. And so thank you for coming on. And now, prior to us kind of talking a little bit about, your retirement from corporate America, would love for you to tell our audience, a little bit about, your upbringing and where you currently call home.
Okay. Well, my home has been for a long time, Brooklyn, New York City, Brooklyn in the house. Grew up there, grew up with Jamaican parents who were strict, and had their rules. Everybody had a tree job. So I think I learned a lot about work ethic from my parents. I have two sisters and a brother. The unfortunate part is that my two sisters passed away, when I started my work life. And that's what makes it extra sad, is that they raised me. My parents passed away when I was a teenager, and my sisters raised me. They passed away when I started, working, and I ended up raising their children. So it's it's a survival story. It's a survival story.
No, absolutely. And what are some of the things that you've been really passionate about professionally?
I've been lucky that, I don't think I've ever had a job that I've not enjoyed, because my work has always been purposeful. I know people are talking about purpose now. I've always been in some sort of HR type role or people development role. So I've got to see people grow in their roles and grow in their career and grow in their lives. And I felt that I've had an impact on that. So for me, what's been great has been throughout my career, early on, have been able to touch people at times that were meaningful, whether they were looking for a job, whether they were losing their job, whether they were looking how to be a better leader. I've been able to, help them on that journey. And I still do that today. So that's my legacy, helping people find, their secret sauce.
No, I like that. And, prior to talking about the launch of your company, tell us a little bit about that work journey and really what's worked well in some of the places that you've shown up.
Since my new job, or just in general?
Just in general. So prior to launching JLC, that human resource background, like what's that journey been like for you?
So in terms of the HR experience, I've worked in primarily communications companies. I've worked at many of the major ad agencies and major ad agent holding companies. I've worked for Black-owned companies like Essence before it was taken over by Time Inc. I worked for a headhunter that focused on bringing people of color into the workplace. So I've worked in not-for-profit at Planned Parenthood during a time where they were bombing clinics. So I've had a variety of experiences. And I think what has been the common thread is taking organizations through change. So for example, when I went to Essence, a magazine, Essence Communications, I was previously at an ad agency called Digitas. And I went over to Essence, or at least Time Inc., to help Time Inc. purchase this Black organization. And Time Inc. being this big gorilla of a company, and Essence being a company that, was homegrown. How do I help take that culture and bring it into Time Inc. without it losing its identity? And so, that has been pretty much the thread that's carried me going into organizations and helping them find their culture and bringing out the best of their culture and making it unique in some special way. So that's the common thread.
No, that's awesome to hear. And, look, so I got my origins for this show really throughout the pandemic. And so I like to often take guests back to that time in 2020 where we're really introduced to COVID. So talk a little bit about how the pandemic affected you.
Well, let's first talk about how it affected you.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Because Brian, you've been talking to many people over the last 3 years, pretty much, I guess, about how they survived or thrived during the pandemic or what's changed them. And I'm sure you have lots of stories about how people have found their true selves, because I think that's probably part of my story as well, of people taking a pause to reflect. So seeing all those individuals that you've talked to, how have you changed as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question. Overall, the pandemic really impacted me on a personal and professional level, because personally in my day-to-day job, so I work in healthcare, I was a part of those redeployment efforts that help providers and other types of folks get to the right places as we were dealing with those first wave of patients. And to see one camaraderie that ensued from that, the lives that we were involved in saving, touched me on a personal human level that I had never, ever experienced in my life, to be honest, personally and professionally. And then I would say, as I've moved into this space of now, interviewing folks about what's happened, what's been great to kind of learn about it, and truthfully what's really impacted me is how rare it is for all of us in the world to go through one singular event. 1918 was the last, whatever the flu was.
It kind of reminds me of, 9/11.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
We all went through that. And then, it didn't last, but how we all sort of came together and, in being in New York on the subway, people would speak or give you your seat. Just a little things. People say hello in the street. They became much more human.
Yeah.
After 9/11, I feel the remnants of that, during the pandemic.
Yeah, without a doubt. And so I've seen what I'd love to see and hear and learn is how when people got that time to themselves, the light bulbs that went off, right? And so in my stories that I kind of chronicle here, people are now recognizing, well, maybe I didn't really want to be in this specific role. Maybe I wanted to do something else. Maybe I recognize that, look, I have this space, time, and opportunity to do this one thing. Let me give it a shot. Let me give it a full shot, because let's be honest, we're at work 7.5, 8 hours a day. We're not working that whole time through, right? So now people are being much more efficient with their time. And they're also recognizing, hey, I can do this for me. I want to do this for me. I want this next part of my life to be different. And so I've really been inspired by a lot of the stories that I've been, chronicling, because it's great to just hear people recognize this in themselves. So my show is, yes, it's about why people left their jobs, but it's really like when you start getting into it, and if people want to, binge episodes, they can, but it's really about self-actualization. It's really about, here's now what I always thought I could do this. Now I'm doing it. And wow, now I'm thriving. And so it's been a beautiful kind of story that I'm telling through the stories of other people.
That reminds me that I think this pandemic, and certainly for me, brought out qualities that I had, but I didn't realize I had.
Like what?
I think any crisis may do that to you. So for example, March 16th is when we all went. Well, in my company, March 13th was decision. We are closed, right? And so that March 16th, 2020 it was, we never went back. We technically never went back to the office. Not really, not the way we did. And so April of that next month, I started to see how other leaders in my industry and in the advertising industry were changing or feeling displaced, either emotionally or jobs were beginning to, go away, or people were beginning to go on furlough. I mean, it was a short time that things started to change quickly. So April 23rd, I created an organization with the help of two other women called We All Rise Together. And the purpose of that, it happened in the moment, got on a Zoom call, my personal Zoom, invited 50 people that were leaders or rising leaders in the advertising industry, and said, people are losing their jobs. Businesses are closing. People of color, particularly, were suffering from mental health. We can do something. We're leaders in our companies, a lot of them in the C-suite, some CEOs. What can we do? So we met every month over a 2.5 period and helped people find jobs, did counseling, helped get funding for organizations that were suffering. And it all happened in the moment. And I realized that one of my secret powers that I'm using now in my new role, on my own, is how I can galvanize people around a cause, how I can get people together when I believe in something, how I can get others to believe in something. And, I don't think till you just started speaking that I realized how much the pandemic influenced who I've become as a leader. I talk about my company and who I am. I lead with love, and love was not a word that you used before 2020. In the offer, when I would use that word love, people love, and you love your job or you love this person. But my team would tell me, Judy, you lead with love. Now that's popular, but I do think that the pandemic certainly helped in so many ways to bring out our superpowers, to bring out a sense of community, and to bring out a sense of humanity that we didn't recognize we needed, and we needed it.
I agree with that. And especially that last piece about bringing out humanity. And what I hope now is, because now we're starting to see things almost kind of shift to pre-pandemic life, right? When some of the things that's going on, I'm really hoping that we as people, and truthfully organizations, don't forget about the humanity piece of this.
How do you think you do that, Brian? Though, how do you think, like, if you could do a call to action?
Yeah.
Does anything come to mind that? Certainly your podcast helps. Conversations help.
Yeah.
I will say one thing, and I'll as you're thinking, I went to dinner with a group of, again, something impromptu, about 8 HR talent leaders that I've worked with over the years. It was just impromptu. Someone was coming in town. Hey, let's all get together. At dinner, I asked everyone, what is something you need and what's something that you can give to this group? And so people talked about what they needed and what they could give. And one of the things that they needed was safety, a sense of community, feeling that they're siloed. And so now we've agreed to come together periodically and be there for each other. And you would hope that HR people would naturally have a sense of community, but all of us suffer from stuff. There's a way that we could all find ways to build community, to be there for another, like your podcast is doing that, but ways to have conversations. Maybe that's not a specific action, but that's one of the actions that I would encourage people to get out of their comfort zone, to reach out to people that you've worked with or not worked with, or, people you've liked, and connect, because people need that sense of connectivity.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that, because so one, and I'll answer your question in just a minute, but I think that connection piece. So I had a lot of posts of late about, because the fact that we're all now in this remote space, well, most of us are in this primarily remote space.
Yes.
It can get lonely, right? It can get lonely. And the importance, I like to talk a lot of times Fridays, I like to talk about wellness, but it is important, to your point about connection, reaching out to people to really touch base on the things that you may be interested in, right? Or you need, like, your tribe or your cohort of folks who you're connecting with, because this at times cannot be easy, right? It can be hard. And so I love that you are at least providing a space for your group, your cohort, right, to at least have that, because more people do need that. So I would say that is one type of call to action. The other, now to get to your question about, what can orgs do? I think for those places that have genuine remote work policies, just to kind of start high level, we got to keep those. I think there's no reason, and there has been kind of proof in the pudding. If you're able to do that, then it shouldn't be rolled back. And if it's being, or when it's being rolled back, I think folks are wise enough to know that oftentimes it may be about real estate costs, right? Like, we have all this space tied up until 2030. We need folks to come here. And maybe just be honest with people. But the notion that, and what I've been reading and seeing, is that, that we want to get the culture back and we want to bring culture. And that's why we're bringing folks back together. People see right through that. And so I think maybe starting there is one place. You got to, it comes from a place of trust, of saying, hey, we're going to do this and we're going to stick to it and kind of keep it moving together.
Yeah. Are you a fan? Are you supporting people be completely remote?
I think in industries that can support it, I'm all for it. Personally, I think the future is hybrid, right?
Yeah.
Because at times there are needs for folks, even in my role, to be together. And I get that. But I remember I used to come, you almost think about these things twice. And you're like, oh, you're coming in every day. But I'm coming in every day and I'm sitting on Zoom calls all day.
Yeah.
Why am I really here? You know? And I will say this, even because what we had during the pandemic and in my space was, because we wanted to make sure that if someone got sick, that the whole team wouldn't be taken out, we started rotating in kind of 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off to being in the hospital. Because I was in a hospital setting, although not direct patient care, but that's the type of role I would play. And so what I ended up doing was, because everything was going crazy in New York, I ended up taking my family to Michigan, because my parents were in Florida at the time, right? So I took my family to Michigan. We were hanging out there for a long time. And I was doing work there and I was driving back and forth. But what was wonderful is sometimes I would talk to my leaders and they were like, oh, I didn't even know you were away. And I was like, well, that's the point, right? Like,
yes, right.
I'm getting everything I need to get done. I'm available. Don't get me wrong. Like, I didn't have much work-life balance at that time, but I'm available. You get done what you needed to get done, especially in a time of crisis. But there was never a time that you couldn't reach me, regardless of where I was. And that really opened my eyes to saying, oh, wow, well, I could do this, right? I mean, I'm still providing the same level of support. You can definitely get a hold of me. And when I need to be in the office, oh, look, I'll be there soon, right? Like, I was just driving back and forth. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. I think during the pandemic, especially, I think we worked more than we had done in the past. I mean, because and you couldn't, at least it was hard for me to distinguish between work life and home life. It was all kind of gelled together. And then I think probably in the back of our minds is thinking that I need to prove that I'm really effective, so I'm working even harder to show how effective I am during this time. So the world did change.
It definitely did. And you mentioned something about, we all rise together, which when I initially found you online and I saw that the cause and the mission was fantastic. So kind of where is that now?
So I closed We All Rise Together in December of last year. Because it had a purpose. Its purpose was to bring people together during the pandemic, to help them survive or thrive in whatever way worked for them, whether it was mental health, having a job, or their business was failing. And we made such great progress. And then people started coming out of being completely remote and more in touch. So I felt that the need for that sense of formalized community had been served. So we had a big event around the holidays and, thanked all the people that worked on it, acknowledged the people that helped bring it together. Some of those people helped me with my website, because I said, starting my own business. And that was the other thing I was starting. I was decided to leave WPP and start my own business. And I know that I couldn't do both as well and do it well. Some people have said, we wanted to continue, Judy. And I said, well, here, take it on. They're like, oh, no. No, that's okay. Right. I want to attend. I said, well, then keep in touch with each other. So it served. I think it's okay to recognize that some things serve a purpose for a period of time, and then it's time to move on, which is actually a question that I think I should I'd like to give you is your podcast focuses on the pandemic, quitting your job during the pandemic. And, soon it'll be, beyond 3 years that, so at what point does your podcast evolve or move away from anything concerning the pandemic? Or will that always be a topic of discussion?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I often get asked about that too, because I think, I did hop on a moment of obviously the pandemic, the great resignation and all of that. And, my premise as I look to evolve the show, one of my premises is that we don't talk about resignations enough. And I think that as I continue to grow the show, like right now, as we're recording this, we're in season 3, but as it evolves, I want to talk about that decision point of when folks resign and what led up to that, what went into that, and how was it that you came to that decision? Because more often than not, when we make my thought is that around 28, 30, you make a decision to leave a role, it's going to be, decently impactful, especially if you have, a partner, maybe, kids or something like that. Like those are big decisions. And I don't think we talk about that process enough. Rare is it that folks are making split-second decisions to quit. There is a lot of planning that goes into it. There is a lot of reflection that goes into it. And I really want to explore that. And so as I continue to grow the show, it'll be along those lines. And so what I would love to do is I'll eventually, open it up to that purpose of we all resign. I want to hear about your moment, a position that you resigned from and why that was most meaningful to you because of that role or maybe what happened next or why you decided to resign that role. So
people might be afraid to burn bridges. I don't want to be too honest, Brian, because, you never know where you might end up 3, 5, 10 years from now.
No, without a doubt. I'm not worried about people burning bridges. Only because even with this, like even with, when I did the intro call with you and everyone I speak with, it's not about bashing the companies that you've worked for, that you've left from. It's really about you internally, right? And sometimes, I want us to, like, we don't, talk about leaders' names and sometimes we don't even talk about orgs if folks don't want to talk about it. And that's fine because it's really about you and why this was a moment for you, right? And why you're leaving this role because of something that's going on. Now, granted, some of the things that may be going on, and I've had folks, allude to it in other episodes, could have been a leadership issue, right? But I don't dig too deeply into that. And I respect folks who don't want to get too deep into that because look, I'm in the space, right? So I get it, right? I definitely get it. But I think when folks get a chance to tell the story of why they're making this pivot, some of the feedback that I get the most is, wow, I really saw myself in her, in him, or wow, that was me 4 or 5 years ago, or man, I wish I would have heard this. I wish I would have heard this in the past because here are some things that I could have done differently. And when I hear that type of stuff, I'm like, oh, wow, people, back to our earlier point of sometimes people feel so alone. What I hope my show offers is the realization that you are not alone. There are people all across the world who are going through very similar things. And maybe here are a couple nuggets that you can take from their discussion or their journey that may be applicable to you. And that's what I hope I'll get by just kind of expanding it more. Because there's a lot of folks who resigned during the pandemic, and maybe I'll still get some folks who have resigned during that time, but hopefully it'll kind of open up because I think there's some really good stories out there of even businesses that have started after someone decided to leave a role, regardless of the time frame, that I would love that maybe we don't have an origin story for that. And I could provide that, or provide that platform where they can tell their origin story. And I love doing that. And I like talking to people. So selfishly, I think I'll have fun.
There's some more questions. And I know you're really interviewing me, but I want to ask you one question is, looking at the conversations you're having today, are the reasons people are leaving their jobs different than they may have been 5 years ago or longer?
Yeah, I think now it is a little different because, granted, now don't get me wrong, people have always left roles because they weren't supported or they weren't engaged or they weren't developed, if you will. And some of those themes still ring true. But what I often hear is I think more folks are digging into, you hear about this lifestyle design more frequently now. People are more in tune with, maybe chasing or trying to climb this proverbial corporate ladder is not something that I want to do. I was told this, I was sold this, and I was doing this, but that's not me. And now that I've had all this time, because the pandemic changed everybody, right? One way or the other, it changed everybody. And now that people have had this time, like, you know what? I don't really want to do that. And truthfully, like, why? Why do I want to do that? Instead, I could do this type of thing. And granted, people want to make sure, especially if they have a family, they can support themselves, they can support their families. But then can I live in a way that is true to me, whether, whatever I'm going to be doing? And so I think some of the reasons, especially now that are different than maybe 5 years ago, is now folks are saying, you know what, let me go ahead and try to do this thing. And what I think has been helpful for that is social media, because people can make a ton of money or not, right, on doing stuff online. I think that's been a game changer for a lot of folks in the various areas that I kind of see them showing up in.
Yeah. Another thing that I've found is that obviously, people talk about, living with purpose and doing things with purpose. I have a daughter who's 21 who has received her undergraduate degree, is going for a master's, received her undergraduate degree in 3 years.
Oh,
Summa
nice.
cum laude, by the way.
Nice.
But,
Congrats.
It's much more, money matters to her generation, but certainly doing purposeful work, working in an environment where you feel cared for, where they see you. My growing up in corporate America, I never thought about the organization trying to see me. I was there to serve. I was there to, do my work, put my head down, and maybe if I'm lucky, someone will see me. But, it's a whole different world. And, one of the things I try to tell organizational leaders, and some buy into it, many don't, is you say you want to be people first. Okay, let's unwrap that. Because if you're truly people first, then to your point, Brian, you'd be talking to me about what I want for my life, not just about what we're doing for this job. And so if I said to you, and I work for you, Brian, if I said to you, Brian, one day I want to own my own business, or one day I'd love to have my own podcast, then if you were truly a people first manager or company, you would find ways to help me reach my truest potential, regardless of where it took me. And the loyalty will come in other ways, or maybe that person would stay solely because they know that you're there to support them. But people are going to leave jobs anyway. But if we could have the mindset that truly people first, and what you'll get by working with me is someone that's going to help you reach your dream, I think that could be a game changer if that were really the case.
Absolutely. And I want to pose something to you now. And it's so funny you mentioned this, because at the time we're recording this, I just released an episode where I had a great conversation with this guy named Matt Doan. And towards the end, Adam Grant had come out with this thing around how side hustles being good for individuals and how they help not only the person, but the organization, because they do better work because they're more focused.
Yes.
And so what Matt did was he said, what if all organizations, like as far, to your point around being people first, they helped people or provided some type of funding or support for them to kick off some side project that may not have anything to do with work.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's radical, right? Because
I did that in one of my companies many years ago. And one
tell me about that.
Started when you met the person who introduced us.
Yes.
We had a program for your side hustle. And it was after hours at 5:00. We had a consultant come in that you're interested in a side hustle. We want to help you get there. And you went through a series of workshops on how to start your business and how to do that outside of work. I will say it didn't get as much traffic as I would have liked, because I don't think, it got some, certainly, but I was expecting more or hoping for more, because I still felt at that time, and that was 2018, people still were not trusting that you could actually say that at work, that you could say, yes, I'm interested in doing something other than this. I think we've grown a lot over those years. But yeah, that was because my passion has been help people to be their best selves, whatever that is, whether it's a parent, whether that's the job they're doing, whether it's that side hustle, but invest in helping people be the best that they can be, and the rest will follow. But people also have to believe that you mean it.
That's true. That is true.
And
but I
you have
love
to
that.
That sense of trust that people feel that it is okay to really be myself in the workplace and to share with you who I am. And so that also means you have to share who you are.
Right. I love that a lot. I did not know that, but so I think that is we talk about being people first. That's an example of doing that. So you mentioned it a couple times around, how you left, right? And I mentioned earlier how you retired from corporate America in October, but not from work, but from corporate America in October of 22. So ultimately, why did you leave your job during that time?
Brian, I should have left years ago. I was scared. When I came into this new role that I had at WPP as the global head of culture and engagement, I came into that role from another WPP company in January 2019. When I took that role, I declared that I'd be in this role for 2 years. Declared it publicly, said it on a podcast. My husband was like, would you stop telling people that? Because that's paycheck we need.
Right.
But I said, no, I declared it because if I declare it, then I can release myself. And I couldn't make the jump. And then, the pandemic happened, and then the murder of George Floyd, and there was just too much work that needed to be done in the corporation. My company had 110,000 employees. Leading culture there, it was overwhelming, and I couldn't do it. So eventually, 2020 being such a crazy year and a horrific year, I took a sabbatical. And I, again, very upfront with my employer and said, with this sabbatical, if I come back, I'm going to come back part-time, which I did, 3 days a week, and I will use those other days to work on my business. But Brian, I started doing not-for-profit work. I had We All Rise Together. Never could get that LLC. Never put it off until finally, one day I had a conversation with my CEO, and it was like, when are you ready? How can I help you get ready? And he was one of those CEOs that we were friends first. So I knew that this is something that I had been talking about and broadcast about. So when are you ready? And how can I help? And he helped and became a client. And I made that leap. And the leap was so much easier than I had anticipated. As much experience as I had behind me, as much confidence as I tend to show, I was scared. And I was, who's going to hire me?
Right.
Who's going to talk to me? Who's going to return my call if I don't have this big company behind me, as my identity? But no, people, without even trying, people would see my posts on LinkedIn. Oh, you're doing a sponsorship program. Someone I met 30 years ago at one of my companies I worked for at BBDO said, we're doing a sponsorship program. Can you help us? Another organization that's very, I don't know if I should say the companies, but a big organization said, oh, I see you doing this Elevate program, which was a program I created at WPP for Black women to help Black women find their voice. And it was specifically designed for them. And they asked us, could you do it for any other underrepresented groups? Sure. So I've been doing this program for 6 months with this other company, but things have just fell in my lap through relationships. And many of those relationships are relationships that were started decades ago. And, one of the great lessons for me there is a lesson that I pass on to my daughter is that your brand starts truly the moment you're born, but certainly as soon as you take your first job, your brand starts. And who you are speaks louder than your resume. People will buy who you are more so than they'll buy the skills that you can demonstrate, on a piece of paper or digitally. So the trust that you build, the relationships you built, the history that you built, your reputation that you built are all the things that have built my company of JLC Ventures. And it's been so much easier than I thought it would be because I was already building my company years and years ago without realizing it.
No, that's awesome. And I appreciate you sharing how, and I saw your LinkedIn post and it mentioned how, it took 2 years for you to make this decision. And I appreciate your transparency and how you're like, hey, like I was scared. I had to get past this fear. And, I notice a lot of that there's a consistent theme with that in the conversations that I'm having too. And that people sometimes are, scared of what's on that other side. But truthfully, that other side could be beautiful, could be really, really beautiful. And I think you're kind of like a living testament to that, and so when you finally made this decision, so clearly your CEO was on board, but how did people kind of respond to you kind of making this move?
Well, since I've been talking about it, in any podcast, any
nobody was surprised.
Like about time. And that's what was great about it, because then people started raising their hand. How can I help? How can I help?
Okay.
How can I help? I was shocked. CEOs, my former assistant, so many people, LinkedIn, how can I help? Free advice. Another friend of mine who is an entrepreneur, you can use my office. When do you want to, you can use my office. I mean, it was the gifts of time, the gifts of advice, the gifts of free dinners. Like, who's paying for dinner? Because, I don't know when my next check is coming.
Right.
But no, people have been incredibly kind. And so that's another surprise, sadly, that it's a surprise. But, being in an HR world, a people job, I'm always thinking about what am I supposed to do to help you? Like, what can I do to help you? Oh, you need a job? Oh, you didn't get your paycheck? Whatever it is. Like, so I was not used to someone coming to help me. That was being able to receive. I was always easy to give, but able to receive was like, oh, you obviously want something, right? Do I need to pay you? Please don't. You already have through other things that you've done. And that was hard for me to accept. It was hard to accept. So people are much more generous and loving and giving than I gave them credit for.
And, and this is based on my, we've talked a couple times, but I truthfully think, and I'm getting a great vibe from you, I think it's a testament to you. Right.
Oh.
You give, my opinion, you give off a natural sense of like authenticity and caring that I think people often resonate with, or I can see people resonating with. I've talked to you, three times max. That's the vibe that I'm getting. And so truthfully, it's no surprise to me that folks would respond to you in that way, given the feeling that I have talking with you now.
Well, thank you, Brian. I hope I didn't insult anyone by saying I didn't expect such kindness.
No. But I think it's a great point that you mentioned. Look, I was in the HR space for a few years as well, employment law space for a while. And we are often in that give mode, right? And that wanting to make sure that it's always like resolving something, like getting to the end of whatever, whether, like to your point, how do I get you that paycheck, or how do I make sure that you have this conversation for whatever, end goal you're trying to meet. And so we don't, and I often joke sometimes and say that sometimes the HR role is a thankless job, right?
Yeah.
We don't, because people come to us only when they need something, rarely when can we just get invited to the pizza party?
Right.
That's rare, right? But I think, when you have that impact on folks, like it is hard to one, like truthfully receive that, because just we're kind of wired in a way where, it's just tough. It's just tough.
Right.
So I definitely.
And that's why gratitude is such an important value for me. I post about gratitude. I try to acknowledge people that have done things for me, whether big or small, throughout the years. And I think people have often taken gratitude for granted. My daughter has grown up knowing you say thank you when you get because I've had nieces and nephews. I give them a gift. I'm like, no card, no text, you just said thank you to yourself.
Right.
But I think it's such a currency, and it's an important value for us as people to, really use. Even when we talked earlier about checking in, that's part of gratitude. Today, someone reached out to me that I worked with at a company a while back, and again, with my hat on, how do I serve? I said, okay, so, how can I help you? And like, No, Judy, I'm just checking in to see how you're doing. Back in my mind is, okay, we're going to get to something that
Where's the ask?
and
Right, right.
it wasn't anything other than, just want to make sure you're okay, see how your business is going. Just want to say hi.
I love that.
And that's gratitude. That's an expression of gratitude. And I think the more that all of us can do that, the better the world could be, because a lot of us are in thankless jobs, or a lot of us don't realize the little things we may do that make someone feel special. Your podcast, how many people have you touched through your podcast? How many people have learned about themselves through your podcast? And how much have you learned about yourself through these podcasts? And
yeah.
so, we all have so much to be grateful for and to thank others for. And if we find those moments to say thank you and with purpose, it just brightens up everyone's day, and hopefully it brightens up our lives.
No, absolutely. And, one of the pieces of the show that truthfully gets a lot of traction is the advice portion, right? And so as I'm, hearing and going through our discussion, I'd love for you to share some words of wisdom for those who may be listening, right? And so let's say someone is in a similar situation to what you were going through, right? They know, even though they may have, exalted that they're going to leave X amount of times, they're maybe struggling to kind of get across that hump. And so for those who are kind of in that boat, but maybe unsure what to do next, what type of advice would you give them on truthfully making those next steps?
I would say get your posse together. Get your posse, whether it's your personal board of directors, 5 or 6 people that you trust who may have impacted you at different points of your life. Maybe you've worked for some of them. Maybe they've worked for you. And maybe it's someone else that owns their own business. But bring your posse together. Get your core of advisors together. Get those people together who you can be your raw self with. Share with them your challenges. Share with them your insecurities. Share with them your highs. And you will build together. And I know you don't necessarily say names, so I'm going to say a name. My first client was someone that used to work for me, Corey Stevens. He was at a company and he said, we need a guest speaker. And I was still at WPP at the time, but I had announced that, yes, I definitely am leaving. And he gave me my first assignment as a keynote speaker. And he's part of my board of directors. So bring your board of directors together, bring those people together who you love and trust, and, brainstorm with them and use them to challenge you and to lift you up, because I do think you need a community around you that helps you to see the things you don't always see. Just last night, I did an exercise of, where have you seen me at my best in my professional life? And I asked my board of directors to answer that. And I saw a lot of similarities, but ask people, ask your spouse, ask your partner, ask a friend, ask people you work with, where have you seen me at my best? Because that may inform where you lean, because where you've been your best is probably where you shined, and it's probably where your secret power is.
I love that. And, similar to the question you asked me earlier too, as we think about what's next for employers, like what do you think they could be doing more to better support employees as we look to the future of work?
I would go back to what we talked about earlier, honoring people first, because pretty much all companies say that. And if you really mean people first, mean it, do it. Find out what each person that matters to you wants and help them get it, even if it means leaving your company.
That's big.
Make
that
people
big.
first.
No, I love that. And as you talked about JLC Ventures, and as you think about the impact that you're trying to make for the future, what does this next chapter for you and JLC Ventures kind of look like?
Look at my website, leading with love and culture. But it's about different ways in which I can make the workplace more human. Whether that's coaching a leader to be more effective, whether it's taking employee survey data and, mulling through that and doing focus groups and trying to see how we can make a better workplace, whether it's doing programs like the one I have called Elevate, which takes a group of people from underrepresented groups and helps them find their voice. but finding ways to make the workplace more human and helping leaders lead that effort because people follow what they see.
Absolutely. And, look, I think this was a great discussion. I'm glad you asked me some questions, right? I think I love kind of going through those flows. And I just really appreciate you taking, some time to speak with me. I think your story is a great one. I think folks can really resonate with that. And look, I applaud, the work that you're doing. Like you mentioned with Elevate, you're really, helping underserved groups kind of, uplift, or to your point, elevate in their career growth. And so would love for us to stay connected, and would love for you to share where folks can find you online and support some of that work that you do, and maybe even buy you a free dinner or something.
Hopefully I can afford to go Dutch.
You can go Dutch. Okay.
But follow me on LinkedIn. I post often on LinkedIn. I post articles about leadership. One of the things I'm passionate about is sponsorship, because, say underrepresented groups, particularly Black employees, are over-mentored and under-sponsored. So follow me on LinkedIn, Judy Jackson, and look for me at JLC Ventures at our new website that was just launched last week.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that info. And look, that'll do it for today's episode. Again, I want to thank my guest, Judy Jackson. I will share her information in the show notes. And look, I hope you all have a great week, and we'll definitely see you next time. Judy, thanks again. Thanks again for listening to Why I Left. Be sure to join us next time for more stories from the Great Resignation. Visit us at www.whyileft.co. That's whyileft.co. And subscribe to the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.